Thank you, Senator Lyons. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. And I've been in this chamber for most of the debate, and I just noticed Senator Lyons' contribution there that she's up for a conversation on tax reform, and I welcome that position. But in the next breath, she says, but we rule out a GST. We rule out a GST of any form. And what is disappointing about that, I think, is because there's so much detail to any kind of tax reform. It's not right to say you should be against something or for something. You need to know what the detail is and what the proposal is before you should form a position. But the Labor Party aren't interested in a conversation about our future. They aren't interested in a conversation about a stronger tax system that can support a stronger economy, because they're just ruling out any change without seeing any detail or any specific proposal. There is no proposal at the moment for an increased GST from this government. There has been suggestions and support for an increase into the GST by some state governments, by some ex-Labor state premiers as well, have given support to that increase. They have supported an increase. The government has not yet taken that decision. But even before we see a report on a tax white paper, even before a particular position on tax reform, the Labor Party have come to their position. They have done no consideration of that. They are just reflexively opposing and blocking anything that might be better for our tax system here in this country, because they see a political purpose in it, not because they see the national interest in it. And I take Senator Lyons' points about the potential impact of any tax change on lower and middle income families. And I am very mindful, Mr Acting Deputy President, to ensure that any changes in our tax system are done in a way to make sure that those that are less fortunate in our society are not made worse off. I'm not usually down this end of the chamber. I usually sit down that end of the chamber, and in that little corner of the chamber down there is the Nationals Party. We're not big in numbers, but I think we're big in strength. The small number of us down there actually represent the poorest households in this country. When you look at the data on who votes for different parties in our political system, yes, Mr Acting Deputy President, the Labor Party also represent low-income households, but the National Party voters are actually lower in income. Next is the Labor Party, then the Liberal Party, and then, of course, the Greens. They're up in stratospheric sort of income levels that none of us could dream of. So we actually represent the poorest income households, and I'm very mindful. I'm very mindful of any changes that might happen, but they haven't seen a proposal yet. And in the introduction of the GST, in the original introduction of the GST, low-income and middle-income households in this country were substantially better off, thousands of dollars a year better off, because of the related changes to our income tax system and to the removal of some inefficient taxes like the wholesale sales tax. That is what we need to see, and that is what is important, and that is what I will be fighting for, and I'm sure my Nationals Party colleagues will be making sure is a component of any tax reform, whatever that might actually be. But in my view, this is one of the fundamental important attributes of any government in our nation, is to make sure we have really two economic tasks. We should be making sure that everything we do strengthens our economy, and that everything we do helps to spend your money appropriately, our money appropriately, and to ultimately balance the budget. Now, on the latter part, the government has tried many things to try and rein in our spending and balance our budget, but at every step of the way, the Labor Party have opposed. Indeed, they've actually opposed savings that they originally proposed themselves while they were in government. They didn't get around to putting them in place, but coming to opposition, suddenly they had a change of view and blocked them as well. And now they're seeking to block changes that possibly could strengthen our economy as well. They are a party of blockers at the moment, and that's a great disservice to our nation. They are not truly engaged in a conversation about how we can become a stronger country. They are simply reflexively opposing everything this government may want to propose. In making a stronger economy, tax reform has to be at the centrepiece of that. Our tax system is crucial to determining how strong our economy is, because it dominates so much of what we do in our lives. Most of us would probably go to work Monday to Friday. Most of us end up in a job where we get paid by an employer, and the employer pays a component of that pay to the tax office. We often don't see how much that is. We might know at the end of the year when we get our tax return from the tax office how much we've paid in tax, but generally we don't think of it from day to day. But one way to think about it is that at the moment, the average Australian would work for 2 and a bit days for this place, for the government. 2 and a bit days it pays taxes. So it works, average Australian works 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, although I know that's probably not the case for many people these days, but for illustrative purposes, 5 days in a week, Monday to Friday, 2 and a bit days you spend working to pay taxes to run the Commonwealth Government. And what is becoming increasingly concerning is that for some Australians, and indeed for the average Australian, they will be pushed up to the tax brackets where it's even more than 2 and a bit days. They will be pushed up to the second highest tax bracket. Indeed, next year, the average taxpayer, the average income earner in Australia, will pay 37 cents in the dollar on their marginal tax rate. And that is going to have an impact. Taxing someone at that high rate, and just to put that in perspective, that 37 cents in the dollar is higher than the tax rate, the top tax rate in New Zealand. The top tax rate in New Zealand is 33 cents in the dollar. We'll have people earning the average wage in our country paying a higher rate than the highest income tax rate in New Zealand. That is going to have an impact on incentives. It's going to have an impact on entrepreneurship in this country. It's going to have an impact on how many jobs are created. And one of the things we should be focused on in this country now is working out how we can make sure we can bring that level down, how we can make sure we unlock people's potential and allow them to keep a bigger proportion of what they generate. If they want to start a business, if they want to create wealth and make a go of it, and they make a return, we shouldn't be taxing the person that just makes the average amount, 37 cents in the dollar, of that return. We need to find a way to bring it down. Now, as I said earlier, some have suggested that we should try to do this by increasing the GST. We do have, of all OECD countries, the second most reliant tax system on income tax of all those OECD countries. Our direct taxation, which encapsulates taxes like the GST, is a low proportion of our tax base. Some state governments have suggested this. Mike Baird in New South Wales has suggested it. Some ex-premiers like John Brumby, like Peter Beattie, like Jeff Gallop and Christina Keneally have all suggested that the GST could be one way in which we could deal with the taxation issues that this country faces. And I welcome that discussion. I do think it's an important discussion, but I do also return to what I said at the start, Mr Acting Deputy President, is that the devil will be in the detail here, that there is some important details to ensure is gotten right before any tax reform will be successful. That's why it's important this tax system is developed. It's important that any tax changes do also coordinate with broader strategies to bring our balanced budget under control, to create an innovative and competitive economy. All of these reforms are going to be very important to grow economic growth in our country and to create more jobs. And there are lots of things to discuss, and we should discuss them and get them right before we announce them. What we should not do is rule out particular areas of changes before any decision or proper discussion has been come to. We saw that approach in the previous government. The previous Labor government had a big tax reform process that was chaired by Ken Henry, the former Secretary of the Treasurer, and right through that process they ruled out something. They ruled out something. And there's no prizes for guessing what they ruled out through that entire process. They ruled out any consideration of the GST. They ruled out all consideration of the GST from the get-go. They didn't even want to hear about it. They didn't want to hear any recommendations to do with the GST the whole time. There was no report on the GST. There was no, if you look up the Henry Tax Review, there was not even a chapter on the GST. Not a chapter on it. It's one of the biggest taxes we raise, and they weren't even allowed to look at it. And that process, by ruling out even considering changes in a really important part of our tax system, that then led to a disastrous tax reform process where, because of an absence of other ideas, the government relied on proposed mining tax, which was, in my view, ill thought through and wasn't going to work. And ultimately, of course, it didn't work. It raised very little money. It was very high in compliance costs. And it has since been rescinded by this parliament, and there's no suggestion, any credible suggestion of bringing it back and reincarnating it. That was one process. That was one approach to tax reform. Close off areas of debate. Don't think about it. Hear no evil, see no evil. What's the other one? Speak no evil. Mr. Acting Deputy President, thank you. That's one approach, and that didn't lead to such a good outcome. The other approach is we have a full discussion on all elements of our tax system so that we can promote growth and create jobs in this nation.